Hi guys, William Pulfer-melville here, and today I'm going to do something a bit different to my usual videos. Today I'm going to do a movie review of a movie that I just saw today at my local cinema. That being the 2025 reboot of the Smurfs. Now, I know some people, this film got panned a lot even before the movie came out, because of the trailers and all that, but I honestly thought the movie was better than what the trailers made it out to be. And I know what some people would be thinking, why did we get another Smurfs reboot when not long ago, back in 2016, we already had another one, Smurfs The Lost Village, which, yes, I do agree, that was a good film. But it's actually a lot more complicated than that, as it turns out that Sony Pictures, who did both the original live-action Smurfs movies and the Lost Village movie, actually lost the film rights to the Smurfs, and they were quickly acquired by Paramount Pictures. So this is actually the first adaptation to not be done by Sony Pictures. Also, I think I should mention that as a big time, the Smurfs have always had a nostalgic... I've had a lot of nostalgia for the Smurfs for a very long time, and that's mainly because, as a kid, my mum and dad used to get me and my brother... They always used to rent a DVD of the original Hanna-Barbera series from our local Blockbuster Video. And I essentially became intrigued in this world, as well as the adventures of these little blue-skinned gnomes. Anyway, so the movie itself, though, decides to sort of do its own thing with the property, while still bringing up elements that are crucial to the original comics by Peyo and the Hanna-Barbera series and what came before. They decided to sort of do their own thing with the Smurfs for this movie, as the beginning of the film actually establishes that the Smurfs are actually descendants of a group of guardians of good, who basically have to defend everything that's good from evil that wishes to get rid of goodness entirely. With it being revealed that Papa Smurf actually kept one of the books that these evil wizards were after, an anthropomorphic book named Jaunty, in the forest near the village. However, one day, Papa Smurf is kidnapped, and it's up to some of the Smurfs to leave Smurf Village in order to basically save him. At first they believe that Papa was kidnapped by their arch nemesis Gargamel, only to find out that he wasn't responsible. And so, using a magic record player, they have to travel through the multiverse in order to save Papa and stop this evil council of wizards. While Papa also gave them instructions right before he was taken to go find Ken. Who they don't actually know who Ken is. And once they are sucked into the record player, they end up going through a portal where they end up in the real world. In Paris, it so happens. where they are found by a mysterious group of Smurfs who take them to a Parisian nightclub where they have basically a settlement inside a disco ball in which those Smurfs introduce them to their leader, Ken, who so happens to be the long-lost, estranged younger brother of Papa Smurf. And things get really interesting as the film goes on, as they then travel to Australia, where they encounter a group of fuzzy creatures called the Snooterpoots. And we find out that Gargamel actually made his way to the real world himself, because it turns out that the real kidnapper of Papa Smurf was actually Razamel, who is actually Gargamel's younger brother. And soon the other Smurfs and most of the Snooterpoots are captured by Razamel, and so Smurfette and another Smurf named No Name and Mama Poot end up using a wreck of an old car in order to open a portal where they end up in Belgium, where Razamel's castle is, where they are able to sneak in through the gates of Razamel's castle by hiding in a fast food bag being delivered by a DoorDash delivery person. And they are actually able to rescue Papa and the other Smurfs. However, this is where things get interesting, as Razamel then decides to betray his older brother, which actually leads to the Smurfs deciding to perform basically for the Smurfs and Gargamel to essentially have a temporary truce in order to take on Razamel. And soon it leads to a huge fight between Smurfette and No Name against Razamel, and going through all different types of dimensions, including a crudely drawn looking dimension that looks like it was a sketch from a notebook, a 8-bit video game dimension, and even a frickin' anime dimension. And Razamel is defeated. And once Razamel is defeated, the Smurfs decide that, Papa then decides that they will no longer hide, and will now, essentially, whenever evil wizards or other supreme evil beings emerge, they will go out of hiding and protect them and protect goodness. So yeah, this was quite a movie. I've got to say though, the voice acting is actually pretty good. And it's actually got quite an all-star cast to this movie, as we've got John Goodman, who provides the voice of Papa Smurf. Now, Papa is interesting in this movie, as he's sort of like a mix between past iterations, where he is stern but very caring towards his Smurfs. As we all know, he gets his name from the fact that he is basically the father figure to all the Smurfs. And I think John Goodman's voice really suited the role. But apart from that, he is also very overprotective, much like he was in Lost Village. And it's revealed that in this film, the reason behind his overprotectiveness is and why he and his brother Ken were essentially estranged for 100 years was because they thought that their youngest brother, Ron, died when he sacrificed himself to save them from Razamel. Which actually does give a fair bit of backstory to Papa, something that we don't really get in previous media. The closest we actually got was in the Hanna-Barbera series when we were introduced to his mentor, Grandpa Smurf. But apart from that, we didn't really know much about his past in previous media. For some of the other voices I also quite like. Like, Rihanna is absolutely adorable as the voice of Smurfette in this movie. And Smurfette actually comes off as very much like every modern portrayal of her, where she's far from being the damsel in distress like she was in the original series. As they do give her a bit of spice, for lack of better words, in this movie. Such as she is, like, she's very good with how she's very good with her words, but is still very kind and compassionate, but can also hold up a fight against Gargamel in this movie. Oh yes, and this movie still brings up the fact that she was a creation of Gargamel, something that Razamel actually takes full advantage of and tries to peer pressure her into thinking that she is inherently bad because of the fact she was created by Gargamel. Which is something she actually isn't convinced at once to join their side. Because she knows how cruel Gargamel is. I also really love how incredibly caring she is in this movie, especially towards the new character created for the film, No Name. Which then leads on to No Name, who is a Smurf created specifically for the film. He is a kind-hearted, yet very clumsy sort of Smurf with an English accent. He speaks with an English accent provided by James Corden, and I think his voice really suited No Name. He really wants to find his place in a village where he's practically an outcast. And I think it kind of helps with how he has an English accent as opposed to the other Smurfs who have American accents in this movie, as it does help distinguish him as an outcast from the rest of them. And also, spoiler alert for the ending, but No Name sort of thinks he finds his thing when he starts being able to perform magic, later revealed to actually be Jaunty, the magic spellbook who was hiding under his hat the whole time. But at the end, he does gain magic powers of his own and is dubbed Magic Smurf. Then some of the other voices we get in the film include... Well, I might as well talk about the film's main antagonists, Gargamel and Razamel. Gargamel is a character that is very familiar with the Smurfs' source material, as he is an evil wizard who wants to capture the Smurfs. Now, his actual goal of what he wants to do with the Smurfs has always been inconsistent. In some media, he wants to turn them into gold, while in the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, he just wanted to eat them. And in the Sony movies, both the live action and the Lost Village, he wanted to capture them so he could abstract this blue essence that could give him unspeakable power and become the most awesome wizard of them all. Here, however, he wants to capture the Smurfs in order to essentially be granted membership in the Council of Evil Wizards, something that his younger brother Razamel has been a member of, and he's been told to find the Smurfs or else he will get his membership revoked, which is why he is basically tricking his older brother into helping him. Now, the interesting thing was that they didn't get a big name actor to voice Gargamel or Razamel. In fact, they decided to get voice actor J.P. Carliak to do the voices for both Gargamel and Razamel, which I thought was a very bold decision, considering Carliak is a voice actor, not a big name actor. And some of his roles I know him for include playing Green Goblin in Spidey and His Amazing Friends, as well as the successor to Corey Burton as the voice of Dr. Entropy in the Crash Bandicoot video game series. But I think he does a very good job at voicing both these two evil wizards, especially with Razamel, who is revealed to be more evil than Gargamel. And I think, like I said before, they do a really good performance as both evil wizards, especially Razamel, who, like I said, is probably more evil than Gargamel as established in the movie. Because Razamel has no feelings towards anyone, whereas Gargamel, even though he has shown aggression towards his cat Azrael, in this movie they do show that Gargamel does actually love Azrael despite what he puts him through, and Razamel basically has no tolerance for the orange cat. Which, again, is supposed to show that Razamel is the more evil one. Another big difference Razamel has is the influence that he has over others. As unlike Gargamel, Razamel actually does have henchmen, as he's got 2 slaves who work in his castle, and then he also has an intern named Joel, who he puts through constant suffering. Speaking of which, we'll get on to Joel. Joel is Razamel's intern, and is voiced by Dan Levy, the son of Eugene Levy, in case you don't know. Joel is an interesting one because, like I said, he's Razamel's intern, but he also is, well, he comes off as somewhat annoying, but in a good way. And it kind of makes sense in this film's sense, because Razamel comes from a dimension where technology isn't really a thing, so of course he hired a college dropout who happens to be this neurotic nerd to basically be his IT technician by hiring him as his intern. And spoiler alert towards the end, but Gargamel ends up recruiting Joel to be his intern after Razamel is banished to that dimension with the water bear. And then finally you have Nick Offerman, who voices Nick Offerman, who voices Ken, who is Papa Smurf's estranged younger brother, who basically just looks like Papa Smurf, just with a red beard and a knife tattoo on his arm. And the thing is with him is that he is quite resentful towards Papa for leaving him 100 years ago. We also find out that he also has had a romantic past with the leader of the Snooterpoots, Mama Poot. But Ken also has a daughter named Moxie, who basically leads the Paris division of Smurfs. Ken is quite gruff, and he's a bit of a cynic as well. And finally we have Ron, who is Papa and Ken's youngest brother, who was basically a Smurf with a blonde beard, as well as long blonde hair, who Papa and Ken thought died back when they fought Razamel. As he fell down a portal, which they thought led to his death, only for it to be revealed that he had survived 100 years in a dimension full of evil dragons, which he fought himself through and survived. Ron is also described as being the most laid back of the three, which I think is quite interesting. And you can kind of tell that Kurt Russell, who did his voice, was having a lot of fun doing the voice. Now, if I was to have a problem with this movie, it would actually be that, apart from Smurfette and No Name, none of the other Smurfs really get much dialogue in the film. And that is weird, because some of them actually do come with them initially to find Ken. But they don't have much to do. They're basically just there for the ride. So as a result, you just have the other Smurfs clumsy, brainy, hefty, vanity, grouchy, and worry. They're just there and will only just spout an odd phrase or sentence without really doing much in the story. I mean, heck, once they get to Australia, they are kidnapped by Razamel and put in a jar alongside Papa. But they are also there for visual jokes as well, such as Clumsy being, well, clumsy, Grouchy being the cynic, as he usually is, and Brainy even spouting a few odd words that come off as knowledge, but yeah. But also put in the film as well, just so they could have a joke with a snooterpoot stealing his specs. Because I guess a lot of movies have to have that. A character who wears spectacles, having their glasses taken, and not being able to see a thing. I mean, it's a joke that's been around for years, but anyway, moving on. And it's actually quite interesting that they even were given just minor roles, considering how prominent they were in the last films. Another problem I have with the film is how, in the real world, you have a lot of live-action humans walking around, and it's sort of implied that Joel and Razamel's two other henchmen also are native to this dimension, despite actually being animated in CGI in an art style akin to Peyo's illustrations. Unless it's implying that they too come from an animated universe, but were brought over to the real world. Nothing's really explained that far, but that's just my best guess. Another problem I kind of have is how Gargamel literally brings up the fact that he'd sent text messages to Razamel, even though they're both from a dimension where it's akin to medieval Belgium. So, realistically, that wouldn't happen. But the fact that we